Hi, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show, the show for animal training and behaviour nerds, where I, Ryan Cartledge, interview the world's most proficient animal training and behaviour geeks. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever you're listening to this on so that you don't miss a single episode. Each episode of this show is brought to you on behalf of the ATA membership. And if you like the conversations in this episode, then you're invited to continue them with like-minded behaviour nerds within the membership area, which you can find out more about at www.animaltrainingacademy.com. You'll get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help problem solve your training challenges. Plus, we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forum areas. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour geeks. But we will start today's episode where we'll be talking to one Deb Jones. Deb is a retired psychology professor who now trains animals full-time. She has been training for 25 plus years and focuses on positive reinforcement-based methods. Deb has written 12 books on dog training and has helped develop several DVD series. She has also trained and shown multiple breeds to high-level titles in agility, rally, and obedience. She is currently teaching online training classes and webinars at Fenzi Dog Sports Academy, and her newest project is the Cooperative Care Certificate Program in partnership with Fenzi. You can learn more about this at cooperativecarecertificate.com and also visit her website at Canine in Focus for her blog and more information. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Deb Jones to the show today, who is patiently waiting by. Deb, thank you so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. I'm really, really happy to be here. And of course, as soon as I start talking, my dog wants to start barking. But I'm very pleased to be able to be here and to talk to you guys today. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, your dog is more than welcome to join in the conversation today at any point. So,
he will, trust me.
Well, let's waste no time and dive straight into the first question today, Deb. For this one, I was hoping you could please take the listeners back and share about your story, share where you first learned about animal training, about positive reinforcement, and share some stories with us from your behaviour odyssey.
Let me talk about my odyssey or my journey in dog training and in psychology, which started back when I was in college and trying to decide on a major. And I'd had no real idea what I wanted to do. As long as it didn't involve math, I was going to be happy with it as a major, as math was the only subject that was not my thing. And of course, many years later, I ended up teaching statistics for all of my academic career. So I ended up with math whether I wanted it or not. But at the time, I was looking around for something that I thought could hold my interest for a long time, for a whole career. And I ended up in psychology. And I liked it because there were a lot of options. There are a lot of different ways you can go in psychology. And then I ended up meeting somebody who was really, really influential to me, and her name was Marion Cohn. She became my advisor as an undergrad and my friend, and we worked together. Marion was a behaviorist, and she had trained in psychology with a psychologist named Ivar Lovaas. And if you know anything about applied behavior analysis, Lovaas was one of the first people to use it for children who had autism and other kinds of behavioral disorders. And he was actually very, very controversial as well because he used punishment as well as positive reinforcement. But that was her advisor. And so I got a lot of the background and training in behavioral psychology that came through that way. So from him through Marion to me. And it was one of those things where when I first heard about behavioral psychology, all of a sudden the whole world made sense. It was like, oh, this is so clear. And it's so simple and it's so logical. Well, it's not really simple, but in my mind at that moment, it was simple. So I was like, oh, you can explain everything with behavioral psychology. And I loved the simplicity of it, or I loved the logic of it. So I was very enamored of behavioral psychology. So anything, from Skinner, Watson, Thorndike, all of the old names in behavioral psychology. And so that was kind of where I came into it. And Marion had a rat lab at the college that I worked at, that I went to. And then I worked at the rat lab for several years and worked with her. And we did a number of fun experiments, learning kinds of experiments with the rats. And of course, being an animal person just in general, who wanted to spend more time with animals than with people, I got to do all the work with the rats, like socializing them when the babies came in and, working with them and just taking care of them, as well as doing some of the different experiments with them. And I really enjoyed that. And I thought that was kind of the path I was going to go down in my career, that I was going to end up doing research on animals, with animals, having to do with learning and behavior. That was sort of where I started. Then when I got ready to go to graduate school, things were changing in psychology, and behavioral psychology was not such a big area to study anymore. It was much more moving into cognitive psychology. I had a choice when I wanted to go to grad school. I could either focus on social psychology, cognitive psychology, or clinical psychology. Those were the three main areas that you could choose from. And I knew I didn't want to do clinical because I didn't really want to be a therapist. That wasn't my goal. As I said, I wanted to do research. Cognitive got a little more into brain science than I wanted to get into, so I ended up sort of by default focusing a bit more on social psychology in graduate school. And so I branched out from just pure behavioral psychology. And I ended up focusing a lot on persuasion and influence in social psychology. So how can you get people to do what you want them to do? And the answer is you can't. A lot of times you can't get people to do what you want them to do. But there are lots of ways to influence each other. And so I did some research in that area. I looked at advertising, and I actually did some work in jury decision making. I got to work on a study from the Navy that one of my advisors was working on, where we looked at communication on submarines. And it was like, it was a lot of fun, actually. It was sort of like an early video game of how you communicate, how the people in different areas communicate, and whether or not they make the right decision as to whether you ought to bomb somebody or not. So we did some of that kind of communication work. But I still was always kind of had that heart in behavioral psychology, kind of the stricter behavioral psychology. So then it became time to focus on what I was going to do in my career. And again, I thought research, but that didn't work out the way I had hoped. Jobs were sort of hard to come by. It was really competitive. And so they would pay me to teach. So I would teach, because once you're in graduate school, you have to do something. I did some research. I did some teaching. I got some experience teaching, and that's where I ended up in statistics, because nobody else wanted to teach it. And they paid pretty well if you would teach statistics. So I ended up doing it, even though that wasn't my favorite thing to start with. But over the years, I got very, very used to it. And I also taught learning and behavior and so other social psychology classes, and just, a wide variety of things. So then when I was all done with my PhD, before I even got done with my PhD, I should go back. I was in graduate school. I had moved to a new town. And I wanted a dog. I'd always had dogs, but I decided that I needed a dog. And everybody told me not to get a dog while you're in graduate school, because you're going to be way too busy. You don't have the time for it. But of course, I didn't listen to that. And I ended up getting a dog through Labrador Retriever Rescue. Katie was a two-year-old black lab when I got her. And she'd had quite the past that included being feral girl for about 6 months and having had puppies and been hit by a car. She had all kinds of stuff. But she actually turned out to be like the most stable, easygoing, well-mannered dog ever. I just got very lucky and I didn't even realize it at the time. So Katie became my companion. I took her to school with me all the time. She would hang out in my office all day while I was teaching or going to classes. And so I decided I wanted to apply some of the things I knew from learning to teaching her, because all the animals I've ever had before that, you just kind of did, I don't know, whatever anybody told you to do, and it worked or it didn't, or you didn't even bother trying to train them at all. And I'd also had horses and worked a lot with horses when I was younger, so I had some ideas about animal training, not all of them very good ones. And so I decided to apply what I knew. I took Katie to some local training classes, and I was totally and completely appalled by the methods that they were using. This was about 1992. Yeah, around 1992. And it was bad. It was really bad. And just looking at what they were doing compared to what I knew about learning, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense whatsoever that we would use these kinds of methods and techniques. Even though I didn't have anything better, I still knew what they were doing wasn't the right thing to be doing. And it certainly didn't seem like people liked their dogs very much because they were pretty mean to them. So about that time, and this is all while I was still in graduate school, I started reading everything I could on animals, animal learning, animal training. I'd already read a lot, but I was reading things in ethology, like by Conrad Lorenz. I was reading the old obedience books by people like Kohler and Vicki Hearn. I'm not recommending those books. I'm just saying I read everything. I didn't, because of course you can learn what not to do. And I ran across, of course, in this process of reading everything, Karen Pryor, and I ran across the Lads Beneath the Wind, and Don't Shoot the Dog. And so I was more impressed by those, for sure. And that got me thinking about how I would train this dog that I had and how I would work with animals. And so once I had that kind of foundation for myself, once I felt like I had read enough that I had a pretty good idea, I just started trying things with the dogs, with Katie, to see what would work. And luckily, she was such a good first subject because she put up with about anything I did. And she was like, whatever, whatever, do whatever you want. It works, it doesn't. She would go along with the program. She was a lab, so if there was food involved, it was all good. People were still thinking that food wasn't a good idea because it was bribing the dog rather than training the dog. But I really thought that was the way to go. And from the work I had done with rats, I could see how positive reinforcement-based methods would work with dogs and with other animals as well. So I started trying different things with Katie. And this was also all about this same time the internet started to be a thing that you could actually have in your home. I remember getting a disc, one of those 3x5 discs. No, it was a big floppy disk, actually, from Miami University, and taking it home and putting it on the computer I had there and hooking up everything and with the phone and getting on the internet for the first time from home. You could get on the internet at school, but getting on the internet from home. And of course, one of the first things I found was a listserv, and it was called ClickL. That had the people who were interested in clicker training, who had read Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor and were interested in exploring that idea. And to me, that was the first time that people from all over the world could communicate. And we all were similar in that we really wanted to find a way to train animals that was effective, yet was also kind. And so I met, being online, I met a lot of people on that list. And so I met Karen Pryor on that list. I think Marion Breland Bailey was on there for a while. People like Gene Donaldson, Steve White, Terry Ryan. There were I'm forgetting a whole bunch of good people, but there were a whole lot of people. And all we did was just talk about, how we would apply more positive methods to training animals, all sorts of animals, not just dogs, but all sorts of animals. And so that was the first time we started to share ideas back and forth from people all over the world, and started to get the idea that there are other people out there who want to do what I want to do, which is to take things in a much more positive direction, but at the same time that it would actually work and it would be effective, because it doesn't work. It doesn't help if it's not effective. So that was all going on while I was still in graduate school, and about the time I was getting ready to finish my PhD. So I kind of got my own little side PhD in dog training while I was working on the stuff I was supposed to be working on, and my social psychology degree as well. And I came out then starting to not only train my own dogs, and I had probably a couple more dogs by that point, but I also came out starting to help other people and work with other people and network with other people in terms of training animals. So that's sort of where it all got started. And to me, the thing always was, and still is, that you can have knowledge, you can understand learning theory, but you have to be able to apply it effectively. And that's something that's very, very different. Okay? Having the knowledge is one thing. Being able to actually train an animal is something else. And to be a good trainer, you have to have both of those things. You have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and be able to troubleshoot when problems come up. And yet you also have to be a little bit intuitive and flexible about what you're doing, and willing to try creative solutions and out-of-the-box solutions that don't always make sense. A lot of stuff that's sort of counterintuitive at first. So you have to have both of those parts, I think, in order to be an excellent trainer. And I see people all the time that have one or the other. They're really good with the knowledge and the book learning, but they couldn't train in their way out of a paper bag. They just aren't good at it. They don't have those skills. And then there are the people who are just naturally good trainers, but they don't know why they're good trainers. And they can't really help other people be good trainers if they don't understand how to replicate it, and if they don't understand what's underlying it. So I wanted to be somebody who could do both of those things, who could combine the academic knowledge with the hands-on ability to actually work with and train animals. And so that's always been what's guided my career from that point on. And I got into competition, like obedience competition, because that's all there was back in the 1990s. And then we got agility going, and agility started. So I was in agility competitions for many, many years. And then in rally came along, and I competed in that probably up to about 5 years ago or so, with a bunch of different dogs, a bunch of different breeds and types of dogs, and enjoyed competition very much. And that taught me a ton, again, about how to train an animal, that you don't necessarily get from just learning through books, that you have to actually go out there and you run into problems, and you have to figure out on your own how to solve those problems, sticking within my paradigm of it's got to be fair, it's got to be relatively gentle, it has to make sense. Okay? And it has to work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't do us any good. So sometimes what theory tells us will work is not quite what works for any given dog in any given situation. And then you get into the nuances of training, the subtlety of being a really good trainer is when you can move beyond, well, this should work because if I reinforce, behavior ought to increase. Yeah, that's the rule. But then we get into all those cases where it's not working like I thought it was going to. So is it the reinforcer? Is it the procedure? Is it my mechanics? Is it something about this particular animal? And I love that part of it, that problem solving part of when you have a case that doesn't work or a situation that doesn't work the way you think it will. So that's my long history. And it was from college to getting my PhD was 9 years. So that's kind of 9 years of of setting the stage and training in many ways. I ended up then teaching, being a college professor for about 20 years. And I still taught a whole variety of classes, but always learning behavior. That was something I insisted on teaching every semester. And so I enjoyed that very much. But I did a lot of other psychology classes as well. And during that time, then I started writing books, basically because nobody else had written any really good books. We had what Karen Pryor had written, and that was about it back in the day. So I decided that I needed to write books that would give people more step-by-step guidelines on how to train, because trying to just understand how to do it from theory, again, there's a bridge there that's hard to cross sometimes. So I sort of wanted to make it straightforward for people so they could follow some guidelines and some steps that would help them in the right direction. And the first two books I wrote, I self-published way back then, and I would actually take them to the university printer, and they would make up like little manuals for me, and I would sell them, and I would, Dogwise was the bookseller here in the United States, was called Direct Book Service, I think it was called. And so they would buy big orders of them and sell them, or I would sell them, directly, just because nobody else was doing it. Now there's so many books on positive training and clicker training out there. But the first ones were like, there was a clicker workbook. There was a workbook for teachers. And then there was one that I actually had a publisher for called Clicker Fun. And then we made some DVDs. Actually, they were VHS tapes at that point off of that. And so then I started to do seminars and things and teaching classes and doing private lessons and just doing a lot. But I always wrote books throughout the whole thing because I like writing books. Well, I like having written books. I don't necessarily like the writing process all the time, but I like the books when they're done. So I did a lot of that and started to get involved with other dog trainers. We had the Association of Pet Dog Trainers here that I was involved in the beginning, in the early stages of it, and got to know a lot of people through that. And like I say, just kind of one thing kept leading to the other. And then in the last, not quite 10 years, probably about 8 years or so, all of a sudden everything's online. And so now we can communicate so easily all around the world. I had become friends with Denise Fenzi online, and I liked her writing. She liked my writing. We were on some like email groups together. And out of the blue, and I have no idea why I did it, but out of the blue, I asked her if she wanted to write a book with me. I think because I liked the way she expressed herself. And I thought she had something that I didn't. She had more of the intuitiveness and the creativeness that I don't always have, because I can tend to be more straightforward step by step. And then when we asked if she wanted to write a book together. I think she was surprised, but we ended up doing it. And we ended up writing 4 books together. We talked about doing 10, but at 4 we were both like, no, we are so done. We don't need to write. We had other things that we each wanted to do individually, but I'm glad we did that. It was an experience to write with somebody else. And I really enjoyed it. Though sometimes I also wanted to tear my hair out, but hey, that happens with any project. And so then when Denise decided she was going to start this online training school and asked me to teach at it, and I had thought to myself, yeah, okay, I don't know if this is really going to work or not, but I'll give it a shot. What the heck? And I really thought the first class that I taught, I thought, well, I better really save this money because I don't think this is going to continue. I don't think this is going to happen repeatedly, that people are going to take my online classes. And now it's been about 8 years, and the classes, I think, are probably more popular than ever. So it's a good thing I didn't listen to my little inner voice there that told me this probably wasn't going to work, because clearly I was wrong. And I love teaching online. I love the whole online process. And now that I'm retired and Not as energetic as I used to be. Not travel. I don't mind not traveling so much unless it's for fun. I'd kind of rather sit at home and be able to talk to my students from all over the world and work from my sofa. I really enjoy that, and it gives me time to really focus on the specific things I want to teach, and that's what kind of led me to cooperative care work that I've been focused on for maybe the last 5 years or so, and working on that. Let's see. I think that's about getting us up to up to where I am now. I started working in cooperative care, which is veterinary and grooming, and I did it because I got interested in this area, and this is about the time I'd kind of burned out on obedience and I'd burned out on agility, traveling, and competing 3 weekends or out of 4 every month got to be too much for me, just mentally, physically, financially, all of the ways possible. And I was, I think, looking around for something else then to focus on with dogs when I got a dog that had some issues at the vet. And so this was about 10 years ago. Star's going to be 11 actually this year. So 10, 11 years ago. And Star had a bad experience at the vet. And then she was having none of it. And I'd never done anything really with my other dogs. You went to the vet, you did what we did. They dealt with it and we moved on, and same with grooming. It's like, okay, I have to do your nails. I'm going to do them and it'll work out. And usually it did, and well enough. We didn't care much how the dogs felt about it. We only cared if they would let us do it. If we could get a procedure done, that was good enough. So not being really concerned about how the experience was for dogs at all. But then with Star, as I said, she had a bad experience with a vet, and she was very uncomfortable. And that discomfort would lead, I could see her going down the road of biting somebody if she was feeling cornered. And she's a very, very sweet dog. So to push her to that, I knew it was serious for her. And she's a very sensitive dog. So that's when I decided, well, I needed to do something to work on this with her. And there wasn't anything much out there, though I have a friend in this area that I live in. Her name is Linda Randall, and she's a veterinarian. And so Linda has a vet clinic about not quite an hour away from me, but she was going to do some sort of very small classes in her clinic for animals that needed to be more comfortable at the vet. And so we took Star to that, and we worked with Linda, and it ended up being like 3 people with dogs who did this. And Star got better, and I started thinking about, what we were going to do, how we were doing it, how we were approaching it, and just kind of kept going down this path then with the cooperative care work, that this is its own area. It's not an afterthought, or it shouldn't be an afterthought. It's a real thing that could make dogs' lives so much better. And the more I started looking at it, the more I saw the need. I saw how very hard it was for people to do basic things with their dogs sometimes. And that it really ended up with cases of neglect because you couldn't do something, you just didn't do something. And even though the dogs might need it physically. So the more I looked at it, the more I saw that people really needed some help in this area. And dogs really needed some help in this area. And cats. I did stuff with my cats too, the same bit with my cat, the same basic things. And so then I started looking at it as how would I teach people to do this? Hold on. Wizard, come here, please. So then I started looking at, I could say, how could I teach people a little bit more about how to approach some of these things? And it's the case of I was doing things, but as a teacher, as an instructor, you really then need to break it down in ways that almost everybody can understand how to do it, that it has to be more than, oh, I did this and it worked for my dog, because people will tell you that all the time. They have this anecdotal evidence. Well, I did this and it worked. And it's like, well, it worked for you in that one case. That doesn't mean it's going to work for most people most of the time. And that's really what you look for as a teacher, is what's going to work for the majority. And so how can I introduce this idea of cooperative care, of all these different procedures that we would do with our dogs and to our dogs to take care of them physically. And so then, of course, I started, thinking about how to write this down and how to break it down. And it ends up, everything I do almost always ends up in steps that I go through. And so that's where the idea for the book, it's 7 Steps to Stress-Free Husbandry, Cooperative Care, 7 Steps to Stress-Free Husbandry. And so the 7 steps worked out, the idea that we break it down, and there's always a foundation that people are missing. There's almost always, no matter what you're training in animals, what's the problem? There's a foundation that you missed way back when you should have done it. And because you don't have that foundation, you can't fix the problem further down the line. You've got to go back to the beginning steps. So I started thinking and working on what's really the foundation here. What do we need to give people? What do we need to talk about and train before we can move on to the harder things and the things that people really want to work on? What people tell me is the problem is not the problem. So, for example, everybody will say to you, my dog's nails. I can't do my dog's nails. And I say, that's not where you start at all. If you can't do your dog's nails, it's because your dog can't hold still. It's because you can't touch your dog while they hold still. It's because your dog is too nervous about your hand moving towards them. So there are all these underlying things that need to be addressed before we come back and eventually kind of circle back around to, now let's work on feet and nails. And in the book, in fact, the chapter on feet and nails, I put in there, it's like chapter 5, which is step 5. I put in there, if you just turn to this page and you didn't read everything that came before because you think this is your problem, go back. Go back to the beginning of the book, because this is not where you start. This is where you're going to end up, after you do all the beginning steps. So I laid out the steps of, finding a place, establishing a place where your dog's comfortable with handling, with, working on some general stillness exercises. When I asked my vet, who I've had a good relationship with for over 20 years now, and I asked her as I was writing the book, what would be the one thing that you would want dogs to come in doing or being able to do or knowing that would make it easier for you to do your job? And I don't know what I expected her to say, but I didn't expect her to say, I want them to hold still. And that's all it was. If they would hold still, everything else would be so much easier. And that wasn't what I thought, but that became my second step, basically, which is doing Zen work where you're holding still, waiting for something else to happen, rather than, as we often get with dogs that are trained with positive reinforcement, they're very operant and they're offering things. And when in doubt, they try different things. And that's good in its place. There's a place where I want my dog to offer things, where I want them to be very operant. But it's not when I'm grooming them. And it's not when the vet is trying to examine them. So I need them to learn that stillness in those situations is really the best choice. And it's going to pay off really, really well. The whole idea that doing nothing pays off is kind of foreign to many, many animals and to many, many people. That doing nothing is the right thing to do. And teaching that is hard. And it's not really nothing. It's waiting for the next thing to happen. And it's adding duration to something. So working on that idea of stillness and Zen work became my second step in this whole process. So before we've even touched the dogs, we've done some things with them, teaching them that being in this place where they get groomed is good, that being still and waiting for us to do things is good. And then from there, I broke down like the rest of the things you would do in terms of handling, overall handling. I've always done a lot of physical handling of my dogs, but some people are very hands-off in their training and they don't even realize quite what they're missing. So I purposely want my dogs to think that being handled and people doing weird things to you, like, pinching you a little bit or grabbing you and hugging you, that's all normal. That's all part of what happens, and it usually gets reinforced. So there's nothing wrong with it. I want them to think people do weird things to you all the time, and it always turns out well. It always ends up okay. So no matter what strange thing, like they grab your face and they look in your eyes, okay, whatever, because I want them to be so used to that, and that being followed by a lot of reinforcement, that when it happens, and it needs to happen because there's a physical reason, that they're like, no big deal. It's not freaking them out. It's not making them nervous. So I wanted to think about all of the different ways you would handle an animal, might need to handle an animal, and that they were likely to be handled by a groomer or a vet. That what's likely to happen here. So I would watch what the vet techs did with dogs, the way they would hold them, the things that they would do to them, and I would just emulate those. I would do similar things with a lot of reinforcement. And if my dog didn't like something, okay, that's easy enough. Just break it down. Go smaller. And so when somebody says, "Well, I can't even touch my dog," it's like, well, we don't need to start with touch. You can start with holding up your hand and reinforcing. Hold up your hand, reinforce. Hold up your hand. Then move your hand an inch towards them and reinforce. And before you know it, you're moving your hand into reinforce and touching, and you can reinforce. And they're like, "Cool, this pays off. This becomes a signal or a stimulus that good things are going to happen for me now." So I want to make all the handling a cue for reinforcement. Anything I do to you physically means reinforcement is likely to happen. Okay? And we know it doesn't always, but it happens often enough that it keeps it working. And you don't even really have to do the exact thing that's going to happen for this to all help. Okay. Let me give you an example of that. We had a cat who we actually just lost last week, Tricky. He was a great cat. He's in all of our training videos because he insisted he had to be there. But a few years back, Tricky broke his tail. Okay. Long series of events that led to that. So, of course, when does it happen? At night, because all things bad happen at night, apparently. So we rush him to the emergency vet, and he's in pain, and he's bleeding, and I'm thinking he's dying, all terrible things. And so they take him back, and they have to do whatever they have to do to get him stabilized and to give us a diagnosis that it is indeed a broken tail. So we got the drugs in him, did all the things we needed to do, then took him home. And so then we had some decisions to make about treatment. The next day, I wanted to take him to my regular vet. And so we took him in, and they, again, examined him, did all this stuff. We came up with treatments and went from there. He had to have a ton of handling when he was in incredible pain and scared. Okay? And I never trained him for that. I just trained him to let me pick him up and let me kind of move him around in the world and do things like that. But I never would have thought in a million years I needed to train any way to deal with working on a broken tail. That just didn't seem possible. But it held up. He was very, very compliant about everything that had to be done. My vet was always amazed at how easy he was to handle. Now, part of that, of course, can be just general temperament. Some animals are just always going to be easier to handle than others. But the other part of it, I'm sure, is the fact that I did so much with him. I didn't know someday he was going to need it. I didn't know someday he was going to have a broken tail and have to go to the vet, 3 times a week and get laser treatments and have all kinds of other things done for months on end, but he did. And it worked out very, very well because I had done the work ahead. Okay? You can't train it the moment you need it. If you don't train it ahead of time, it's not going to be there when you need it. So it's one of those things with cooperative care that you really have to plan ahead. So, and like I say, I've been working on this now for maybe 5 years. The book got published 3 years ago. It was like right at New Year's, I think, in 2000. I want to say 2018, but that's not 3 years ago. That's already 5 years ago. God. Where does the time go? 2021, 22, 4 years ago. Okay. We're getting there. So, so that's what I've been working through then. And once I got involved in delving into cooperative care, there's just always more and more and more that you can do. And there's more nuance to it. And there's more to learn about it. And again, we get all those cases where what the theory says ought to work doesn't work for this particular animal. And so how can we troubleshoot that? And how can we find a way to work around it? So in addition to the book, actually, even before the book, I was developed and have been teaching a cooperative care class online at Fancy Dog Sports. And also then I did kind of an offshoot of a nails class because that's the thing everybody wants. I can't do my dog's nails. So how can I get to that? So I did the nails class as a little offshoot on that. But people really need to take the bigger general class first, again, to get the foundations that they're going to need to get in order to then work on and do the nails class. Okay. So that's where I ended up from where I started. Somehow I ended up doing dog nails from doing research with rats. But it's all the same in many, many ways. I mean, we know that the laws of learning are there and that they work. And I would say there are no exceptions to the laws of learning, but there can be complications that make it difficult to see how those laws apply or to actually apply them. There can be challenging cases for sure. And that's what's always fascinating to me now is can I see, where this thing is difficult and it seems like there's no solution, but there always is. And it always falls into, my general guidelines of, is this fair? Is it effective? Is it gentle? And also, does it put more responsibility on the trainer than it does on the animal? So I think as trainers, a lot of times we want to make the animal responsible for their behavior change. But that's not fair. It's us as trainers. We're responsible for changing the behaviors of our subjects, whoever those subjects happen to be. It's not on the dog to change. It's on me to make it worth the dog's while to change and to do it in ways that my dog wants to do it. It's not, if I ever have to convince my dogs that they want to train with me, I'm approaching it totally wrong. In fact, I have just the opposite, is that it's like they always want to train and I want them to leave me alone. That's better than I have to somehow pull them into training or force them into it. I want it to be the best part of their day. Every day is the part that we spend training together or working together in any way. So every day with my dogs, I do cooperative care work, even if it's just one nail, and sometimes that really is all it is. But they want to do it. I have my grooming table set up in my living room always. And they basically try to knock each other off of it so they can be the one who's on the table, who gets to do whatever it is I want to do to them on that particular day. And that's how I want that to be. I want them to want it. If my animal doesn't want to work with me, that's my first step. And I worked with a friend of mine, Laura Joseph, who's worked with a lot of different species of animals. And so when I would go visit her, it's always fun because I never knew what she was going to have and what we would be working with that particular day. But she said we had a bunch of different species, a lot of different types of birds, but also we worked with some exotics and we worked with some domestics like possums and pigs and all kinds of different animals. And it's the same thing applies here. We have to, first of all, convince them that working with us is a good idea. We can try to force the issue, but you're not going to get the kind of response that you're going to get if they want to do it. Even an animal that doesn't necessarily want to hang out with people a whole heck of a lot. If we can find a way to convince them that this is the greatest part of your day, that when I come up and want to work with you, that's the best thing that could possibly happen. Then it's easy from there. But it's establishing that, which I guess, we would talk about establishing that relationship. And I think of it as a training relationship, first of all. That once we have that established, then we can do some amazing things with animals that people often don't really think can even be trained. Like, I was trying to say, I enjoyed working most with crows and owls. Owls were very, very cool. Porcupine was one of my other favorite things to work with. It's like, as long as she's not running at you backwards, you're safe, because I guess that's how you get stabbed. But other than that, she was actually a lot of fun to work with. So having had a chance, and whenever I get a chance to work with the different species, I take it, because that's going to teach me a lot. And it makes dogs look a whole heck of a lot easier once you've trained some other species first, or in addition to. And even cats. People are always, I taught a cat class at one time, and people are always like, oh, cats do what they do. And it's like, well, yeah, but they're still creatures, and they still follow the laws of learning. They might be more complex in some ways, they might be more challenging in some ways, but they're still trainable. There's still a lot that we can do with them. And I always enjoy that. Like I say, any opportunity I get, you give me some strange animal and ask me if I want to train it, the answer is always yes. Whether I know what it is or not. I can't think of anything I would say no to, because it really expands your ideas when you come back to an animal like a dog and go, oh, well, gosh, if we can teach a bird to do this, I could, it's not going to be hard to teach my dogs to do it. And I did learn that I had some bad habits from training dogs, actually, when I went to train birds, especially cockatoos. Training border collies, you got to be fast. You want to keep moving along. My pace and timing and speed are all pretty fast. And they're always pushing more and more and more. Do it faster. Can I do it one more time? Can I do it 10 more times? And when I would go with that speed into working with an animal like a cockatoo, they'd be like, what are you doing? And they'd be like, no, this is freaking me out. And so then I learned that you need to slow down and change your pace and approach this species very differently, than you do others. And we get away with a lot of sloppiness with our dogs when we're training them. So working with other species is teaching me to be more thoughtful, and especially in my mechanics, to be cleaner about my mechanics, and to not just take it for granted, but really work to keep them wanting to do the work with me. I feel like I've been talking a long, long time here now. So I think I've kind of got us up to date on where I am and where I came from.
Yeah, well, we say here at Animal Training Academy, and credit for this term goes to Teresa McEwen, that we like to get our guests passion talking. And I think you have clearly offered a definition of what that passion talking is. I get the feeling, as I'm sure our audience of this podcast show does, that you're very passionate about what you're doing now, but that passion has been something that has, the focus of that has shifted and changed from 1992 when you had, was it Star? No, who? Katie in 92?
Yeah, Katie
in 92, and before that or after that when you were working with your rats. Your passion for statistics. I'm just joking, but now now you've reached a stage in your life where I get the sense that you're happy-go-lucky, or you have the freedom. You've created the freedom for yourself to travel to different parts of the country and avoid certain temperatures and climates.
That's true.
And bring your dogs with you and enjoy teaching and enjoy helping dogs and other animals and humans online. You say, and before I move on, actually, I just want to say that it's a privilege to have this opportunity to talk to you. If we think back to Katie, that was 92, so that's 30 years ago now. Have I got that right? 92.
Yeah, it's like, I have to keep, because it seems like, of course, it was like yesterday. It was like those 30 some years go by so fast, and of course, you don't get the perspective until you're there. You can't see, when you start out, where this is going to end up and how this is all going to play out. And then when you look back, you can sort of put it in perspective and make some sense of it and go, okay, I was on this path and it all did come together. But at the time, it was just I was doing these random things that I wanted to do because I enjoyed them. And I took opportunities whenever I could get them to learn more and to do more. I always took any opportunity to talk to somebody, to learn from somebody else, to try again with different species, just to work with people that I thought were good at what they were doing. And I think that all comes together. And I feel, pretty lucky at this point that I can do what I want now. It's like after 30 some years, I feel very relaxed about, I can do what I want in training now. And I can do the things I enjoy. And I still enjoy sharing what I know with people. And I think it helps. I think it helps people. It seems to help dogs, which is kind of a big part of my mission in life, is to help dogs have better lives. And I think the things that I'm doing help with that. I can't say that I won't come up with something different that I want to do, tomorrow or next week or next month and take off on that and explore that. But, that's life. That's what I get to do. And I feel lucky I've gotten to this place where I'm comfortable with what I know and can do as a trainer. And I know for younger trainers coming up, you're not comfortable with that. You sort of don't feel like you know enough or you're good enough or you have something to offer, but you do. I mean, everybody does have something to offer to this field. And it's sort of a waste of time to just feel like, I don't know as much as somebody else, because you don't have to know as much. You just have to do the thing that you know. And I've learned so much from people who think they don't know anything, and from young trainers who think that they don't know enough. I learn more from them than they do from me by a long shot. So, I think having that confidence going forward, it takes time, it takes experience, but I see people spending a lot of time kind of beating themselves up for what they don't know, when in reality, I think that they know a lot more than they think. And it's good to go with your gut sometimes and be more confident. I hate to see trainers who aren't confident in their abilities, but I know that comes with experience.
Yeah, well, that's something that I would label as imposter syndrome, and something I feel like I see discussed a lot, whether it's been labeled imposter syndrome or it's been discussed without that label, imposter syndrome. You used a word there, perspective, and that's why I say it's a privilege to talk to you, because I don't have 30 years of perspective of animal training.
Yet.
That means I would have been 8 when I started, but I wasn't. I was being an 8-year-old. And you said that you burnt out during doing your agility and doing some of the competition stuff. And you're talking to these young trainers who have this imposter syndrome, and you're engaging with them now. And I'm just curious to get your perspective on this, because I can see you and others can't, because they just listen to the audio. And I had the privilege of catching up with you a few weeks ago as well. And you seem so relaxed and content. That's the sense I get. But I can appreciate that life gets lifey, as Emily Johnson Vey would say. And then so just, have you always been like this? Has your perspective always been so relaxed and chilled, or has that perspective come with 30 years?
Not even a little bit. I would say that, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And so even, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be the best at whatever I was doing. I always had that drive to do it right and to be perfect. And of course, we learn as life goes on that there is no such thing. But I really did strive for it. Through college, I wanted that 4.0 GPA, and I got a B. And I was so upset because I ended up with a 3.98. And you know what? Nobody cared. The only person who cared was me. And then I sort of learned in graduate school that you'll never be perfect, because somebody will always criticize what you do, always. And in fact, I felt like graduate school is paying somebody to criticize you for like 4 or 5 years and tell you what you're doing wrong and what you don't know. So either you give up or it toughens you up to that criticism. And so I think that kind of helped me a lot with confidence, was knowing that you're never perfect, that somebody's always going to tell you you're doing things wrong. Doesn't matter what you're doing or how you're doing it. There's going to be somebody who's telling you that that's not the way it ought to be done, or it's not good enough. And who's to say they're correct? Who's to say that they're right about it? So I think that kind of helped me. And I also have the confidence of having the academic background in learning and understanding it. So that I think sometimes with newer trainers, it can all be a little confusing. There's a lot, and it can be confusing. And people can easily throw a lot of jargon at you and make their point, whatever it might be, even though they're not really correct. So I'm not impressed with people who talk a big talk, because that's a thing you can do without being a good trainer or even a good human being. It's easy enough to do. But I think over time, I have just, I have seen that what I do works over and over again, not just for myself, but for my students as well. And so that gives you confidence too. It's like, hey, I made this whole thing up. And wow, it works. It actually does what I tell people it's going to do. It's kind of like, yeah, that imposter thing is like, wow, people listen to me and they do what I do, what I say to do, and it works. And it's like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's amazing that happens that way. But I'm not worried about having to always be right. And I think that's important. And in fact, I'm the first one who will say, oh, that didn't work. Or I used to do it like that, but I don't do it like that anymore because I found out there was something better. Being able to change and not feel like you have to stick to something because that's how you were taught, or that's what you did in the beginning, or that's what you did with the last dog, or whatever it is. But being able to pivot to something new when you learn something different, and let go of whatever the old thing was. So I wouldn't say I could say I was wrong. I was wrong to say you ought to do this 10 years ago. Oh, well, I was wrong. I thought I was right at the time. I told people to do that. Now I don't do that anymore. I moved on to other things. So I don't hold on to things that might be mistakes, but because it's all part of learning, and we do what we know. We do what we know at the time. And then when we find out something doesn't work, if we're smart, we change it. Though I know people who never change, who always do the same thing the same way, for 40 or 50 years, whether it's the best way or not. Okay. So yeah, I've learned to, at this point in my life, be very comfortable with what I know and what I feel like I can do. And also be able to let go of things that didn't work. Everybody will say, I wish I knew with my first dog. When I was training Katie, I wish I knew what I know now and what I've done with Wizard. She would be an amazing dog, blah, blah, blah. She would, and it's all true. But Katie was my starter dog. She was the one that got me on the path. I couldn't possibly have known at that point, or appreciated, what a good dog she actually was until I got that perspective again, until I had 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 other dogs. And I could look at the whole bigger picture. So trying to look at it, I always think about big picture, and then our narrow perspective at the moment. And I'm always trying to look at the big picture and to step out of what's happening at this moment right now and what's the bigger thing overall. And that's how I teach a lot, is I have to see the big picture. I have to see, where it's going and how are we going to get there. But in life, you can't do that. You've always, until you get more towards the end, then you can do it because you can look back and you can have that view of the big picture. But you can't do that when you're a young trainer coming up. You're just seeing, where you're starting, and you're seeing your mistakes, and you're questioning whether or not that means you're even cut out to be a trainer. And the answer is, yeah. If you see your mistakes and you recognize them, then you're cut out to be an animal trainer. and you will make mistakes. Hopefully those mistakes aren't fatal to anybody. Hopefully you don't get yourself hurt in the process or get somebody else hurt in the process. But they're going to happen. We're going to make those errors. And that whole idea is that we learn something new from it, and we don't keep doing the same thing over and over again if it doesn't work. We go, okay, this isn't working. Let's try something else. And that's where I mentioned when I started working with Denise Fenzi, I like her perspective because she's very quick to go, okay, this doesn't work. And then she'll come up with something. I'll be like, I can't even imagine how you would have thought of that. Where in the world did that idea come from? And lots of times in the back of my mind, it's like, that's not going to work. And it does. And I'm like, oh, okay. So getting that fresh perspective from somebody else who thinks differently than you do, I really enjoy that. I really like that. That to me makes it all more interesting. And so I've learned to, not to ever say to her, oh, that won't work, because I've often been shown to be wrong. I've been right every once in a while, but I take no pleasure in that. It's just because I like to see people who have, out of the box solutions and creative solutions and new ways of thinking about training animals, and that they, that they're willing to take chances and take some risks in animal training and willing to make mistakes. And, we survive them. We come back from mistakes and we move on and we do things differently as we move forward. So, yeah, I'm no longer a perfectionist, that's for sure. And I'm very willing to admit when I've made a mistake and when something doesn't work.
Well, I'm sure there's lots of people listening to this episode that are relieved that one can reach the stage of being a recovering perfectionist.
Yeah.
And their perspective is so valuable for everything in life, not just animal training, I feel. The perspective of not being worried about having to always be right. So really, really appreciate that. Hey, what I think we'll do is I want to pick your brains more about cooperative care. And about what the listeners of this show can, your perspective on that, so the listeners of the show can hear a different perspective and add that to their repertoire and their thinking and what they're doing. But I can see that we've been having had the pleasure of listening to your perspective and your behavior odyssey for the last hour and so. So we'll wrap up on part one of this conversation with Deb Jones now, and express gratitude to you, Deb, for sharing everything so far. And we'll pick up again in part two. Thank you so much.
I have enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Ryan.
We do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much everyone for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.